I'm going to tell you something that happened at what was supposed to be a celebration, and I still don't fully know how to explain it. Even now, 2 years later, it sounds like something from a bad afternoon drama, not from my actual life. I'm 44. I run a company that repairs and resells commercial kitchen and industrial equipment, the kind of stuff that breaks down in restaurant chains, hotels, food processing facilities. Not glamorous, but it's mine. Built it from a one-man operation in a rented garage in my late 20s, gradually adding technicians, then a warehouse, then a second location. Nobody handed me anything. Every contract, every client, every piece of equipment. I earned it the way you earn things when you have no backup plan. Slowly, carefully, and with a lot of late nights. I've been married for 11 years. We have a son, Leo, who's 8 and is, without question, the most interesting person I've ever met. He went through a phase of drawing dinosaurs on every available surface, notebooks, napkins, the back of my invoices, and would tell me, completely seriously, which Mesozoic period each one was from. Kid has a mind like a trap. I'm not being a proud dad. It's just the observable truth. Up until about 8 months before everything fell apart, I would have described my life as stable. Not perfect. Stable. Alara and I had a normal marriage. Disagreements, good stretches and slower ones, but nothing that made me think we were in trouble. When she told me she was pregnant again, I was genuinely happy. Leo was excited. We started talking about renovating the spare bedroom. The thing I noticed, and I only recognized it in hindsight, was that in the months before the baby shower, Alara had become more distant. Not hostile, just less present. More time on her phone. Plans she'd mentioned last minute. Short answers when I asked about the pregnancy. I told myself it was stress. I didn't push. That was probably my first miscalculation. Now let me explain her family, because it matters. Alara's father, Alistair, built something large and complicated and controlled it absolutely for decades. A multi-entity family trust covering real estate, investment accounts, operational business interests. He had 2 sons and a daughter, Alara. The sons were not reliable. That was Alistair's own assessment, expressed with the matter-of-fact disappointment of someone who'd already done the math. Poor decisions, no patience for the legal and administrative reality of managing a structure like that. One of them had created financial exposure Alistair had to quietly clean up. So when Alistair asked me to take on the role of executive trustee several years into my marriage, I understood it was both a compliment and a calculated move. He trusted me because I was methodical. I read contracts before signing them. I didn't panic. The role came with real legal authority, operational decisions, managing distributions, executing documents. Formalized, signed, filed. I accepted it seriously and treated it seriously. It never occurred to me it would become the most important card in a hand I didn't know I was playing. The baby shower was at a rented event space near the waterfront. High ceilings, decent catering, the kind of place that gets booked for exactly this. Maybe 70 people, both families, Alara's friends, a few business contacts of mine. Sunday afternoon. The comfortable noise of a party where everyone already knows each other. I was near the back talking to a guy I'd done equipment sourcing with when the room got quieter. Alara had picked up the microphone. She thanked everyone for coming, said how much the support meant. And then, in front of 70 people and the catering staff and her own father, she said she needed to be honest, and that the baby she was carrying was not mine. People describe moments like this as everyone gasping, time stopping. It wasn't like that. The room just went quiet in a way that's different from a normal pause. Nobody knew where to look. A few people looked at me. Most didn't. A woman near the gift table slowly put down her glass. I stood there for probably 5 seconds. Then I put my drink down and walked out. It wasn't calm on the inside, but making a scene would have meant reacting, and I wasn't ready to react. I got to the parking garage, sat in my car, stared at the steering wheel for 15 minutes. I was angry, confused. I kept replaying the last few months, trying to find the moment I'd missed. There were a lot of candidates. Here's the thing. The announcement wasn't the first strange thing I'd noticed, just the most public one. In the weeks before the shower, I'd been feeling like there were things I didn't know about my own life. Inconsistencies in her schedule, a carefulness in how she spoke to me. Nothing I could point to directly, but I'd been around enough business deals to know when the other person at the table has information you don't. So a few weeks earlier, I'd already called Dominic. Dominic is my attorney. He's handled my business contracts for years. Genuinely one of the most unreadable people I've ever met. He doesn't reassure you, doesn't tell you everything's fine, just reads documents, identifies leverage, and tells you your options in the same tone someone uses to read a bus schedule. I called him not because I knew something was wrong, but because I wanted to know where I stood with the trust documentation, what my actual powers were, what would happen if I needed to use them. He'd walk me through the morality clause, a provision letting the executive trustee freeze distributions to a beneficiary if their behavior creates serious reputational or legal exposure for the trust, specific enough to be enforceable, broad enough to cover genuinely damaging conduct. What Alara had just done, in front of 70 people including business associates connected to that trust, was exactly what that clause was written for. I called Dominic from the parking garage, told him what happened. He asked 2 clarifying questions, said he'd begin the process. For minutes, maybe. When I walked back to get my jacket, I could see through the glass doors that people were drifting uncomfortably, the way they do when a party ends without anyone officially saying so. Alara was near the far side of the room, and I could see Alistair. He was watching her, not comforting her, not moving toward me, just watching, with an expression that, even from a distance, was clearly not shock. It was the look of someone who'd just watched something predictable go wrong. He'd understood faster than she probably realized what she'd set into motion. That night, after Leo was in bed, I sat at the kitchen table and went through the sequence in my head. Step 1 was done. Dominic was moving. The clause was being activated. It was more like a cold settling in than anger. 11 years, a son, a business, a trust with my name on it. One decision, made loudly in front of the wrong audience, and the entire shape of the situation had changed. I went to bed knowing there was no going back. The process had started. It just hadn't become visible yet. Monday morning, I went to work at 7 a.m. like I always do. Sounds strange, I know, but the warehouse doesn't care about your personal life. 3 commercial refrigeration units needed diagnostic work before a client pickup, and my lead tech had a question about sourcing a compressor for a hotel contract. So I showed up, drank bad breakroom coffee, and did my job. It helped. When everything else is unclear, at least equipment either works or it doesn't. The problem is always findable if you're patient enough. I needed that morning more than I'd like to admit. Dominic called around 10:30. Paperwork was ready. Morality clause activation formally initiated. Distributions to Alara paused pending review. Access to several connected accounts restricted. He explained it the way he always does, like he's reading from a document he finds accurate. No drama, just sequence and consequence. What I didn't fully anticipate was how fast Alara would understand what had happened. She called that afternoon. Again in the evening. I let them go. I wanted to talk to Dominic again before I said anything that could be used out of context. When I got home, she was already there. Leo in his room with his dinosaur cards. Her in the kitchen looking like she hadn't slept. She told me I needed to stop the process. That it was a misunderstanding. That I had to call Dominic and reverse it. I told her I couldn't do that unilaterally. This was a legal procedure, not a personal decision I could take back over a phone call. She said her father could fix it. I told her he didn't have the authority to override me on trust operations. That was the entire point of the arrangement he'd put in place. That was the moment it landed. Her expression shifted from frustrated to something quieter. She stopped talking for a second. "You've been planning this," she said finally. I hadn't been planning it. I'd been prepared for it. I told her that. She went to bed early. I slept in the guest room. Leo the next morning looked at me across the breakfast table and said, "Dad, your face looks tired." Honestly, one of the more accurate observations anyone made that week. I almost laughed. Almost. About 10 days after the shower, I got a paternity test for Leo. I know how that sounds. But once you know your wife is capable of doing what she did in front of 70 people, your understanding of what's real in your own life develops some holes. I needed confirmed information to function. I can't run a business on assumptions, and I couldn't move forward on them either. Leo thought we were doing a science project swap. Results came back a week later. Leo is my son. Relief and something hollow at the same time. The fact that I'd needed to check said something about where things had gotten to. I sat with that for a bit, then put the results in a folder and kept moving. 2 weeks after the shower, I hired a private investigator, partly for the legal record, mostly because I needed the full picture. He worked 3 weeks. Confirmed that Alara had been involved with someone named Julian, a manager in the commercial kitchen equipment space, which I found grimly ironic, for 14 to 16 months. Consistent, deliberate, something she'd put real effort into keeping separate from her life with me and Leo. 14 to 16 months. Leo had been 6 or 7 when it started. Family dinners, school pickups, weekend drives, and this other thing running in parallel the whole time. When I read the report, I didn't feel the clean, clarifying anger I maybe expected. Just tired. Tired in a way that goes pretty deep. I filed the report with Dominic and moved on. Her brothers called within the first 2 weeks. One conciliatory, family wants to handle this internally. Can you pause the legal process? The other, less diplomatic, made comments about my background and marrying above my station. Interesting, mostly because Alistair himself had never spoken to me that way in 11 years. I told both of them the same thing. The process is legal, not personal, and I have obligations as executive trustee that I'm meeting. There wasn't much they could do. Alistair called once. Sure, call. He asked how Leo was doing. I said, well, pause. You're handling this correctly, Evan. That was it. I still don't know exactly what he meant. About 3 weeks in, Dominic called about something the compliance audit had turned up. When you activate a morality clause freeze, it triggers a standard review of recent transactions. Procedural, supposed to be boring. It wasn't. The auditors found financial transfers that didn't align with the trust's operating procedures. Not small amounts. Paper trail indirect, but traceable. Transactions Alistair had structured himself, not disclosed to other beneficiaries, not documented as required. As executive trustee, I had a legal obligation to report the findings. Not reporting would have put me in a worse position than reporting. So I reported it. Dominic filed. I signed what needed signing. Went back to work. Strange feeling, reporting your father-in-law for financial irregularities during the same month your marriage is ending. But I've always figured that if you take on a role with real responsibility, you either do it or you don't. Selectively following the rules when it's convenient isn't doing the job. It's just performing it. By the end of that month, trust frozen, marriage over in every practical sense. Alara moved to the guest suite, communication mostly through attorneys. Leo asked me one evening, while we sorted his dinosaur cards on the living room floor, if he was going to have to move. I told him no. Whatever happened between me and his mom, he wasn't losing his room, his school, or his routines. He looked at his Spinosaurus card, a current favorite despite what he called its controversial timeline, and nodded like I'd confirmed something he'd already worked out. That kid, I'm telling you, the last couple months before Alara moved out were weird. Not explosive, no screaming matches, no dramatic confrontations. Just quiet in a way that had weight to it. Civil, because we'd been together 11 years and there was enough left over from that. Respect, or maybe just mutual exhaustion, that we didn't turn Leo's home into something he'd have to recover from. Separate dinners, shared calendar for pickups, good morning in the hallway. Co-workers who used to know each other well. Leo handled it the way 8-year-olds do when the adults around them are genuinely trying not to make it worse. Mostly normal, occasional direct questions no adult would ask out loud. He wanted to know if we still liked each other. I said yes, that sometimes people who like each other still need to live differently. He thought about it, and said it was kind of like how some dinosaur species that weren't enemies still couldn't share territory because of resource competition. I told him that was a solid analogy. He nodded and went back to his book. That kid is going to be fine. I knew it then. Divorce proceedings started about 6 weeks after the shower. Dominic connected me with a family law specialist. Claire, same quality as him, treats complicated problems like engineering problems. The trust situation ran on a completely separate legal track, which kept the financial complexity from tangling up the custody questions. Dominic had insisted on that from day one, and he was right too. The divorce itself wasn't the hard part. The hard part was custody. Not because it was ugly, but because it meant sitting in conference rooms discussing my son's daily life in language that makes everything sound like a logistics problem. What school does he attend? Who provides primary transportation? Holiday protocol. The actual texture of a kid's life, and you have to talk about it like you're drafting a service agreement. It isn't a service agreement. It's a kid. The evaluation took several weeks. I'd been his primary daily parent in the practical sense for most of his life, not because Alara wasn't present, but because my schedule had always been built around school hours in a way hers hadn't. I coached his science fair project. I knew which version of the dinosaur ranking system was currently active and why the Cretaceous entries got demoted 3 weeks ago after he read a new book. The court awarded me primary custody. Alara got scheduled visitation. I want to be clear, I didn't fight to cut her out. That was never the goal. Leo needs his mother, and that fact doesn't change. The arrangement just reflected what his daily life already looked like. Not a punishment, just an accurate description put into a legal document. First weekend she took him, I came home to a quiet house. Made dinner for one. Watched something on TV, I don't remember. Went to bed early. It was fine. Not easy, but fine. I've learned those are different things. Julian, I know people will ask. From what I understood, He genuinely hadn't known about the announcement plan. Found out the same way everyone else did, publicly, no warning. When the paternity question came up formally, he acknowledged it and stepped into that responsibility. I made a deliberate decision not to follow that situation closely because it wasn't mine anymore. No legal or financial connection to that child. Dominic had made sure of that early. A line that could have been messy was instead just clear. The trust took longer to resolve than the divorce. Several months of lawyers and documentation after the audit findings. Alistair cooperated. I think on some level he respected that I'd done what I was supposed to do. He put me in that role because he wanted someone who'd take it seriously. And I had. A portion of the irregular funds was returned, structural changes made to oversight procedures, trust continued to function. I remained executive trustee. The appointment was tied to the trust documents, not to the marriage, and there was no legal basis to remove me. If anything, the audit had demonstrated exactly why Alistair structured the authority the way he had in the first place. About 4 months after the divorce finalized, I bought a house. Nothing dramatic. Good yard, good school district, a room Leo immediately claimed for his books and dinosaur reference collection, a space I use as a home office for evenings when I'm going through contract paperwork. Leo helped pick it. We toured 3 places on a Saturday, and he had detailed opinions about all of them. He approved the one we chose because of the backyard dimensions, something to do with a remote-controlled project I still don't fully understand, but have committed to funding. Moving day was one of the better days I'd had in a while. There's something about physically putting your things in a new space that makes a new chapter feel real, instead of just theoretical. Business had a strong year. 2 new regional contracts, another technician, upgraded the diagnostic equipment I'd been putting off for 2 years. Work moves forward even when other things are standing still, if you let it. I still play tennis Sunday mornings with a couple of guys I've known for years. Still take long walks when I need to think through something without sitting at a desk. Reading more than I was a year ago, which feels like getting something back I'd quietly lost track of. Last week, Leo told me, completely seriously, that he'd been reconsidering his entire dinosaur ranking methodology and that significant reclassifications were coming. I asked what prompted the review. New data, Dad, he said, and went back to his notebook. That's not a bad foundation to be working from. I'm not with anyone right now. That's fine, genuinely, not as a thing I'm managing. It's just not where my head is. Maybe at some point. But right now I've got a business that's running well, a house that's mine, and a kid with a methodology review underway. Some mornings that feels like more than enough.
This is such a healthy story, honestly. Despite all the betrayal and the mess, it leaves you with a really good aftertaste. You read it and realize, if you work hard, stay honest, and keep your integrity, even the worst storm won't break you. That final scene with him and the kid in the workshop, with the aquarium bubbling and Gary the fish in the background, that's just the perfect happy ending. Life didn't become movie perfect, but it became calm and real. And that's probably the biggest victory of all. Long story short, this story is fire. It's incredibly relatable and feels like justice served. The ending for these characters is exactly what it needed to be.